street was loud, crowded, and restless. Midday traffic crawled past the sidewalks. Vendors shouted. People moved quickly, focused on their own business. No one expected anything unusual to happen. Then it did. A tall, heavily built man stepped directly into Steven Seagal's path. "Hey," the man said loudly, blocking the walkway. "You think you're tough?" A few pedestrians slowed down. Some recognized Steven immediately. Others just sensed tension. Steven didn't answer. He stood still, relaxed, hands loose at his sides, expression calm, almost unreadable. The man smirked, mistaking silence for weakness. "That's what I thought," he continued. "You celebrities walk around like nobody can touch you." A small crowd began forming. Phones quietly came out. Someone whispered, "Isn't that Steven Seagal?" The aggressor leaned closer. "Say something." Steven looked at him, steady and composed. No anger, no fear, just quiet awareness. For a second, it felt like the entire street paused. The man pushed him lightly on the shoulder. Not enough to start a fight, just enough to provoke one. Still no reaction. Steven adjusted his stance slightly, barely noticeable. But anyone trained would have recognized it instantly, balance shifting, weight grounded. "You scared?" The man taunted, raising his voice to impress the growing audience. A few people laughed nervously. Others sensed the shift in energy. Something about Steven's stillness felt different. It wasn't hesitation. It was control. The aggressor grabbed Steven's collar. That's when Steven finally spoke. "You don't want to do this." The words were calm, even polite, but there was something in his tone that didn't match the chaos around them. The man laughed loudly. Or what? The tension thickened. Even the traffic noise seemed distant now. No one realized that in that exact moment, the situation had already changed. Because some men shout, and some men don't have to. If you were standing there watching this happen, would you step in, or would you hit record like everyone else? The man's grip tightened around Steven's collar. Up close, his confidence looked forced, loud, performative. The kind that feeds off attention. "You think I'm joking," he said, leaning in. "I've seen your movies. This isn't a movie." A few people in the crowd exchanged uneasy looks. Some were smiling, expecting a dramatic outburst. Others sensed this was about to turn real. Steven didn't flinch. His breathing stayed steady. His shoulders relaxed. His eyes locked onto the man's, not aggressively, but deliberately. That calmness did something unexpected. It irritated the aggressor. "Say something." The man barked again, giving him a sharper shove. This time the push was harder, enough to draw a reaction from anyone else. Steven took one controlled step back, not stumbling, not retreating, just repositioning. Balanced.
"Ground it ready."
The man spread his arms dramatically, playing to the small crowd now fully invested. "See, nothing, all talk." A couple of his friends stood a few feet away, laughing loudly, hyping him up.
"Yeah, show him," one shouted.
But Steven's eyes never left the aggressor. "You're looking for attention," Steven said quietly. "Not a fight." The words were simple, but they landed. For a split second, doubt flashed across the man's face. Then pride took over. He stepped forward again, this time closing the distance aggressively. His chest bumped into Steven's. It was meant to intimidate. Instead, it revealed something else. Steven didn't move. Not even an inch. The crowd felt it. That subtle shift in power. The aggressor noticed it too. His jaw tightened. "You think you're better than me?" he snapped. Steven slightly tilted his head. "No," he replied calmly. "I just don't need to prove anything." The man's face turned red. Embarrassment mixed with anger. The audience wasn't reacting the way he expected. They weren't cheering him anymore. They were watching Steven. And that's when the aggressor made the mistake that would change everything. He raised his hand. Not fully a punch, but enough to cross the line. And the moment his arm moved, Steven moved first. The moment the man's arm lifted, the atmosphere changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. Before anyone in the crowd could even process what was happening, Steven stepped slightly to the side, not backward, not forward, just enough to redirect the incoming motion. His hand moved with precision. He caught the aggressor's wrist mid-air. Not violently, not wildly, just controlled. And that's when something important happened. The crowd expected a punch. Instead, they saw stillness. Steven rotated the man's wrist inward at a subtle angle. It didn't look painful at first. In fact, from a distance, it almost looked harmless. But human joints are fragile under the wrong pressure. The wrist isn't designed to twist against its natural line. When force is applied at the correct angle, even a strong person loses balance almost instantly. That's exactly what happened. The aggressor's body shifted forward involuntarily. His posture collapsed slightly. His bravado flickered. "What?" he started to say. Then his knees bent. Not because he wanted to kneel, but because his body no longer had structural support. Here's what most people don't understand about confrontation. The loudest person often relies on emotional dominance, volume, posture, intimidation. But physical control is something entirely different. It doesn't need noise. It doesn't need spectacle. It only needs leverage. Steven didn't tighten his grip out of anger. His face stayed neutral, almost analytical. "You're off balance," he said calmly. The man tried to pull away. That was another mistake. When you resist a joint lock incorrectly, your own force increases the pressure. The more he pulled, the more unstable he became. His friends stopped laughing. The crowd stopped whispering. Now there was silence. Human psychology shifts quickly when perceived power changes. Moments earlier, people were waiting to see Steven react emotionally. Now they were watching a demonstration of control. The aggressor's breathing changed. Fast, short. Adrenaline was no longer fueling confidence, it was fueling panic. Steven leaned slightly closer. "I told you to walk away." There was no anger in his voice. That's what made it heavier. The man attempted one last burst of resistance, twisting his shoulder to break free. Steven adjusted effortlessly. A slight step-inward pressure. And just like that, the aggressor was on one knee. Not slammed, not thrown. Placed there. That distinction matters. Violence seeks damage. Control seeks resolution. The man looked up, confusion replacing arrogance. For the first time since this started, he realized something deeply human. He had misjudged the situation. Not because Steven was famous, not because of reputation, but because calm is often mistaken for weakness. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who understands force the best. The street was completely silent now, and everyone watching understood. This wasn't chaos, this was calculated. The man was on one knee, not because he had been thrown, not because he had been struck, but because his own balance had betrayed him. Steven still held his wrist, not aggressively, not crushingly, just enough to maintain control. The crowd stood frozen. In confrontations, people expect explosions, shouting, swinging chaos. What they were witnessing instead was something far more unsettling: precision. The aggressor tried to shift his weight, attempting to stand quickly and regain dignity. Steven anticipated it before it happened. A slight adjustment of grip, a subtle rotation, pressure redirected toward the elbow. The man inhaled sharply. Pain, but controlled pain. Enough to command compliance, not enough to cause injury. That difference is important. Untrained aggression relies on emotion. Trained response relies on structure. Steven stepped slightly behind him, guiding the arm upward at a natural but restrictive angle. From the outside, it almost looked instructional, like a demonstration rather than a fight. "Relax your shoulder," Steven said calmly. The advice sounded strange in the middle of a street confrontation, but here's the human truth. When someone panics, their muscles tighten. Tight muscles increase vulnerability under joint control. Relaxation reduces strain. The aggressor didn't understand that. He tensed even more. Another mistake. His other hand attempted to swing backward blindly. It wasn't a clean punch, just a desperate reaction. Steven shifted again. Minimal movement. The strike missed completely. In one smooth motion, Steven guided him forward and down, this time both knees touching the pavement. No slamming. No theatrics, just placement. The crowd gasped, not because it looked brutal, but because it looked effortless. The man's breathing was loud now. Pride was collapsing faster than his posture had. A few minutes ago, he was performing. Now he was surviving. Steven leaned slightly closer, maintaining control without increasing force. "You wanted attention," he said quietly. "Now you have it." Phones were raised higher, but the energy had changed. Earlier, people were recording entertainment. Now they were recording a lesson. The aggressor muttered something under his breath, anger mixed with embarrassment. He tried one final time to twist free. Steven released pressure for half a second. Just enough. The man attempted to stand aggressively again. And that's when Steven applied a clean leg sweep. Not flashy, not cinematic, technically simple. The man found himself flat on his back, staring up at the sky. Wind knocked slightly from his lungs. Disbelief in his eyes. Steven stepped back immediately. He didn't hover, didn't posture, didn't celebrate. He simply created distance. Dominance isn't about prolonging control. It's about ending conflict efficiently. The street remained silent. And in that silence, something became clear to everyone watching. This wasn't anger. This wasn't ego. This was capability under control. And that's what makes it dangerous. The man lay on the pavement, staring up at the sky. For a few seconds, he didn't move. Not because he was seriously hurt, but because his pride had taken a heavier hit than his body. Around him, the crowd stood frozen, phones raised, mouths slightly open. Just minutes ago, this had looked like entertainment. Now it felt different. Real, raw, uncomfortable. The aggressor rolled to his side and slowly pushed himself up. His movements were cautious now. Measured. The loud energy he had entered with was gone. Steven stood a few feet away, hands relaxed at his sides again. No fighting stance. No threat. just presence. That contrast hit harder than any strike could have. The man looked around. He saw faces, cameras, witnesses, and something shifted inside him. Human ego feeds on audience approval. When people laugh with you, confidence grows. When they go silent, confidence collapses. His friends, the same ones who had been hyping him up, were quiet now. One of them avoided eye contact completely. Embarrassment is powerful. It forces reflection in ways pain cannot. "You done?" Steven asked calmly. No mockery, no aggression. Just a simple question. The man swallowed. His breathing had steadied, but his eyes told the real story. The adrenaline rush was fading, replaced by clarity. Most street confrontations escalate because neither person wants to look weak. Pride keeps pushing the situation forward. But here, something different happened. Steven didn't step forward. He didn't demand submission. He didn't humiliate him further. He simply waited. That waiting created space. Space for choice. The aggressor brushed dust off his shirt, avoiding direct eye contact now. "This isn't over," he muttered quietly, but even he didn't believe it. Steven tilted his head slightly. "It can be," he replied. "There's something psychologically powerful about giving someone an exit instead of forcing defeat. When a person feels trapped, they lash out. When they're given a door, they often take it." The man looked at the crowd, then back at Steven, and for the first time since this began, his voice lost its edge. "Forget it." 2 words, but heavy ones. He stepped back. His friends followed. No more shouting, no more chest bumping, just retreat. The crowd slowly began to murmur again. Some people lowered their phones. Others whispered to each other. Not about violence, about control. Steven adjusted his jacket slightly and turned to walk away. No victory pose, no speech, just movement. And that, more than anything, defined the moment. Because dominance doesn't need applause, it needs discipline. As he walked down the street, people moved aside instinctively. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Behind him, the aggressor stood still for a few seconds longer, processing what had just happened. He hadn't been beaten senseless. He hadn't been humiliated publicly with insults. He had simply been shown the difference between noise and power. And sometimes, that lesson stays longer. Be honest, if you were in Steven's position, would you have reacted with the same control, or would anger have taken over? Steven had taken only a few steps when the distant sound of sirens began to cut through the air. Not loud, but approaching. Someone in the crowd had called the police the moment voices were raised. In crowded cities, tension spreads quickly, and so does response. The aggressor heard the sirens too. His posture stiffened. Fear works differently than pride. Pride makes you loud. Fear makes you quiet. Steven stopped walking but didn't turn around immediately. He simply waited. The patrol car pulled up to the curb. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the scene. They saw the small crowd. They saw phones recording. They saw one man dusting himself off and another standing calmly several feet away. "What's going on here?" one officer asked firmly. The crowd began talking at once. He started it. He shoved him first. He grabbed his collar. Human behavior in groups is predictable. When tension is high, everyone wants to clarify their position, to make sure they're not associated with the aggressor. The officers separated the 2 men. The aggressor's voice had changed completely now. "It was nothing," he said quickly. "Just a misunderstanding. Minutes ago, he had wanted attention. Now he wanted distance from consequences." The officer turned to Steven. "Sir, are you hurt?" Steven shook his head calmly. "No." "Do you want to press charges?" That question hung in the air. Legally, he could have. There were witnesses. There were recordings. The shove. The collar grab. Clear aggression. The aggressor looked down at the pavement waiting. This was another defining moment. Power isn't just the ability to win a confrontation. It's the ability to decide what happens after. Steven studied the man for a second, not angrily, not emotionally, just assessing. Then he answered, "No." The officer paused. "You're sure?" "Yes." That single word changed the entire tone of the scene. The aggressor looked up briefly, confused. Why let it go? Because escalation feeds ego. Resolution builds authority. One officer recognized him now. "You're Steven Seagal, right?" Steven gave a small nod. The officer's posture shifted slightly, subtle respect but professional. "Well," the officer said, glancing at the aggressor, "consider yourself lucky." Lucky. The same word the aggressor had used sarcastically earlier. Now it carried different weight. The officers issued a warning and dispersed the crowd. No arrests, no dramatic ending, just accountability without destruction. As the patrol car pulled away, the street slowly returned to normal. Traffic resumed. Conversations restarted. Vendors called out again. Life moved on. The aggressor stood there a moment longer. He looked at Steven, not with anger this time, with realization. There's something psychologically disarming about mercy. When someone has the upper hand and chooses restraint, it forces introspection. If Steven had humiliated him further, resentment would grow. But by walking away, he left the man alone with his thoughts. And sometimes that's heavier than punishment. Steven adjusted his sleeves slightly and resumed walking down the sidewalk. No victory, no celebration, just calm. Because real strength doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need revenge. It simply handles the moment and keeps moving forward. Behind him, the aggressor finally turned and walked in the opposite direction, quieter, smaller. Changed. The street had returned to its normal rhythm. Traffic flowed again. Vendors called out prices. Conversations resumed as if nothing significant had happened. But for those who witnessed it, something had shifted. Steven walked steadily down the sidewalk, blending back into the crowd. No rush, no tension in his shoulders. Just controlled movement. Most people expect confrontation to end with dominance displayed loudly, shouting threats, visible victory. But what happened here ended in silence, and that silence carried more weight than noise ever could. A few pedestrians glanced at him with quiet respect. Not because of fame, not because of movies, because of discipline. The difference between reacting emotionally and responding strategically is something most people only understand after they've made mistakes. The aggressor stood several yards behind, staring in the opposite direction now. His friends were gone. The adrenaline had fully drained from his system. What replaces adrenaline is awareness, and awareness can be uncomfortable. Moments like this don't just affect the person who loses. They affect everyone watching. Some of the younger bystanders replayed the scene in their minds. The shove, the calm response, the precise control. They had expected chaos. Instead, they witnessed restraint. Human beings are wired to react when provoked. It's instinct. Ego rises. Heart rate spikes. Muscles tense. Words become weapons. But discipline interrupts instinct. That's what made the situation powerful. Steven didn't prove he was stronger by overpowering someone. He proved he was stronger by controlling himself. As he reached the corner of the block, he paused briefly at the crosswalk. The light turned red. Cars stopped. For a second, the reflection in a nearby storefront window showed him clearly. Steady posture, even breathing, no signs of agitation. To an outsider who hadn't seen the confrontation, he looked like any other person walking through the city. And that's the point. Real capability doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It doesn't seek validation. It simply exists. Across the street, two teenagers were talking excitedly. Did you see how fast that was? He didn't even look mad. Those observations mattered. Anger is predictable. Control is rare. The aggressor, now alone near the original spot, finally started walking away. His steps were slower than before. Not injured, just thoughtful. There's a quiet psychological shift that happens when someone realizes they misjudged another person. Confidence built on assumption collapses quickly. He had seen a public figure and assumed softness. He had seen calmness and assumed weakness. He had confused silence with fear. That miscalculation cost him his pride. But it may have gained him something else, perspective. Because sometimes humiliation becomes transformation. Steven crossed the street when the light changed. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The lesson had already been delivered. Power without rage, strength without ego, control without cruelty. As he disappeared into the flow of the city, the moment dissolved into memory for most people. But for a few, especially the man who started it, it would replay again and again. Not as a fight, as a realization. That intimidation works only when the other person accepts it, and the most dangerous individual in any room is often the one who stays quiet. No applause followed, no dramatic music, just footsteps fading into the city noise, and the understanding that sometimes the strongest move you can make is walking away.